Hear me okay? Okay, great. By a show of hands, who among us here has been part of a parade? How about a march? What about a protest? I invite you to turn to your neighbor and share as you feel comfortable with them. When have you participated before in a parade, a march, or a protest? And those worshiping online, I invite you to also respond in the chat. Lots of chatter in the sanctuary here. I love it. So a parade, a march, a protest. Each of these things are a little bit different, aren't they? They're not really synonyms. They can each carry a different mood, a different purpose, a different risk with them. So when you think of the story lifted up today, of the events leading up to what we call Palm Sunday, when a Jewish man claiming to be king rode in on a donkey and a colt, going into the city of Jerusalem, a city that was and still is considered to be holy to the Jewish people, and was also at the time occupied by the Romans. How would you describe this intended event that this all led up to? Was Jesus headed into a parade, a march, a protest? I participated in a few of these myself over the years. When I was in high school, I was in marching band. I played the French horn, so in marching band that usually translates to the mellophone, which I played. And we were a good marching band, actually. We had a good reputation, you might say. And when I was a sophomore, the whole marching band from Valley High School traveled to to California, and we participated in a parade in Disneyland, as well as the Rose Bowl parade. So we were part of this parade, you might say, in the name of Mickey Mouse and football. I don't know. When I was visiting with my family in Iowa, a couple of years, I joined my oldest brother and his family for several 4th of July celebrations and parades to celebrate our independence and the privilege that we have with the freedoms that we have here in this country. In 2014, when I lived in Minnesota, I joined with friends as well as strangers on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in a march where we lifted up a call for justice, particularly that year for African Americans following the death of a young man named Michael Brown, who was shot and killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri. Perhaps you remember that. This march was also part of the early years of a greater movement started by 3 African American women known as Black Lives Matter. I lived in Hong Kong for 4 years, where I served as a missionary with the ELCA. I moved back to the United States on June 6th, 2019. 3 days after landing back on US soil, protests broke out in Hong Kong in response to a proposed bill that would greatly impact the Hong Kong people. When I interacted with people here in those first few days and weeks back, I was miffed at their comments. Thank God you're here and not there. Oh, you must feel so lucky that you're back home now. And my response was that, especially in that moment, 3 days after coming back to the United States, I felt like Hong Kong was my home at that point. And the people whom I had come to love and consider my family there were under attack. And in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to be there with them, at risk with them. And last June, I had a first-time experience. I joined several people from Trinity, as well as dozens of others from the ELCA from our Northwest Washington Synod in the Seattle Pride Parade. Now, it wasn't my first time joining a Pride Parade, but it was the first time I had done so while wearing a collar, exposing my identity as clergy. The church has done a lot of damage to the LGBTQIA+ community. And there's no question that I felt nervous showing up there with my identity clear as day in a space intended for celebration and advocacy when I knew that not everyone would look at me and want me to be there. Parades, marches, protests. One of the most beautiful things about them is that they generally don't cost much. They are an accessible way for people to gather and lift up their voices in celebration for advocacy, justice, peace, outrage, joy. And they generally don't cost very much. Or do they? I want to name and acknowledge that in the examples that I just lifted up, in my own personal experience, I come from a place of great privilege. I am a straight, white, cisgender, healthy, able-bodied, U.S. passport-holding citizen of the world. I have a lot of privilege. Now, I've also faced struggles, as we all do. But in the examples that I gave, I opted in. I chose to participate. I knew my status from which I came, and I admittedly assessed the risk of these situations, and I opted in. What I haven't shared with you are the times when I opted out. The times when there were opportunities for me to join a parade, a march, a protest, and for this reason or that, I opted out. When I decided I'm just not passionate enough about the issue at hand. When the conditions sounded uncomfortable, or the timing inconvenient. The times when I thought, the cost of this is too great. And so I want to ask you, when did you choose not to participate in a parade, a march, a protest? Parades and marches and protests can be quite costly. In the tableau we heard today, this freeze frame with pictures that zeroed in and zoomed in on this one individual, we heard today our main character reveal some humanity that maybe resonates with you. It certainly resonated with me. Those mixed emotions of wanting to show up, of not wanting to miss out on what was happening when everybody was gathering, of feeling the urgency that, yes, Things need to change. We need to do something about it now. But also feeling afraid. Afraid of what might happen when things get stirred up, when the status quo is disrupted, of how this might change my life and how others might view me when they see, oh, you were among those others. You're one of them. We tend to lift up Palm Sunday as this great day of celebration, which it is. We retell the story that had pomp and circumstance, of the amazing, brave, and countercultural act of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. Yeah. Wow, what a guy. And the people, they laid palm branches down for Jesus because they were excited about this new king who had come to change things, to release the oppressed, to be a humble yet mighty leader for them. But not all of the people wanted him there. Some of them didn't want him there at all, and some of them were just afraid of what stirring things up might do for them and for the greater community. Nonetheless, Jesus went, and Jesus entered into this space with great risk. As we move through the season of Lent, you have gotten just a taste today of how we will go on this kind of slower paced journey through Holy Week, starting today with Palm Sunday. And as the season goes on, I invite you to pay attention to how the mood, the purpose, and the risk of these gatherings around the story of Jesus, the stories of Holy Week, change as we move towards the cross. Parade, march, protest. Which of these does Jesus lead? Which of these does Jesus enter into? And which of these does Jesus invite and urge each and every one of us to participate in? As we move through Holy Week, we will eventually receive an invitation from Jesus when he says to pick up your cross and follow me. This is an invitation that Jesus extends to you and me every single day. It's an invitation to risk your reputation, to set aside the things that are uncomfortable or inconvenient. It's an invitation to enter into the story with Jesus. As we now enter into a time of prayer together, I invite you to consider the parades, the marches, the protests that are taking place right now in our community and throughout the world. And I invite you to consider the parades, the marches, and the protests of your hearts and in your very lives. Today we remember our King riding into the city of Jerusalem on a donkey. And soon we will see Jesus walk through that same city with a cross dragging behind him. Parade, march, or protest. In celebration with peace for justice, there is risk, there is a great cost, and there is a God leading us saying, "Come and follow me." Amen.